You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday, 10th of September 2014. Reverend Nathan Ntege, 55, is accused of marrying almost 500 bogus couples. BBC reports 250 children at risk of grooming in Greater Manchester. At Britain's door, migrants defy French border crackdown. Austria's Vice-Chancellor Reinhold Mitterlehner calls to bring back Austrian border controls. Germany, leading destination of asylum seekers for the past 2 years, moves to tighten asylum rules. Has Egyptian President al-Sisi found the solution to Palestine? An offer of land in the Sinai without Hamas. Majority of surveyed Chinese expect war with Japan. Australia arrests 2 in Islamic centre raid. Thought for the day, a multiplicity of mantras. And finally, 2 for one day Wednesday. UK News. Reverend Nathan Ntege, 55, accused of marrying almost 500 bogus couples. A vicar has been accused of facilitating a matrimonial conveyor belt after performing hundreds of sham weddings so foreign nationals could stay in the UK, a court has heard. Reverend Nathan Ntege, 55, is accused of marrying almost 500 bogus couples at St Judes with St Aidan Church in South East London. The court was told Ntege's aim was to provide an industrial-scale abuse of the system of immigration control within the UK. Immigration officers were said to have become suspicious because of the inordinate number of weddings that were taking place at the parish church, which rose from 6 a year to 6 a day. Edward Lucas, prosecuting, told the court. He said that many involved European Economic Area nationals, mainly Bulgarian, marrying non-EEA nationals so the latter could try to remain in the UK. Jurors were told how several brides at some ceremonies shared the same wedding dress and queued at the back waiting to get married. World at 8. This man should be deported immediately and so should his victims. There must be records of these marriages and they should all be traced and deported. We should send out a message that this is not allowed in Britain today. The stronger that message, the better for us. BBC reports 250 children at risk of grooming in Greater Manchester. Nearly 250 children are at risk of being sexually exploited across Greater Manchester, the BBC reports. Figures show that out of 246 children being dealt with by local councils, 111 were deemed to be at high risk of being sexually exploited. Rochdale Council had the highest number of children at risk, but said tackling sexual exploitation was one of its top priorities. The council's assessment looks at school attendance, home life, sexual health and types of risky behaviour. The rating is reviewed at least every 3 months or following a significant event to allow the teams to monitor progress by the rating score increasing or decreasing over time. Gail Hopper, Director of Children's Services at Rochdale Borough Council, told staff were now better trained, skilled and supported to effectively assess and manage risk. She said there was a better process of identifying, assessing and intervening with young people at an earlier age. BBC Radio Manchester obtained figures from safeguarding boards across Greater Manchester, the groups of professionals who are given the job of protecting children from abuse. World at 8. The one prime concern for these investigators is the fact that if these children live near a Muslim community or go to school with Muslims, therein lies the main risk. At Britain's door, migrants defy French border crackdown. It took Eritrean migrant Adhanomi Gabre 2 years and several brushes with death to reach northern France from his East African home. Now 35 kilometres from his destination, he says no border controls can keep him from reaching Britain. England is my goal, Gabre, 28, said outside his makeshift tent near the French port city of Calais. The question is not if I succeed but when, he said in English, adding he had tried at least 40 times since May. French officials estimate the number of illegal immigrants in Calais at 1,500, up by 50% in the past year, their numbers boosted by conflict in the Middle East and North Africa. The fact that Britain is not one of the 26 European Union members who have abolished controls at their common borders has long made Calais one of the flashpoints in that struggle. Aid workers say new migrants who travel from southern Europe through the free travel zone are East Africans who are poorer and less well connected than earlier waves of migrants from Pakistan and Afghanistan. European news. Austria's Vice-Chancellor Reinhold Mitterlehner calls to bring back Austrian border controls. Austria's Vice-Chancellor Reinhold Mitterlehner has acknowledged that the number of refugees travelling through Austria into Germany presents a substantial problem and that the reintroduction of border controls might be something to consider. This comes after the CSU, the Bavarian allies of German Chancellor Angela Merkel's party, announced it is preparing a 7-point emergency programme, including reinstating border controls with Austria to limit the number of refugees entering Germany from the south. Bavaria's state premier Horst Seehofer wants to suspend the Schengen Agreement, which guarantees freedom of movement and abolished border controls between European countries, which have signed up to it, at the state's border with Austria. Many towns in Bavaria are complaining that they are now overburdened with asylum seekers and refugees. Under the Schengen Agreement and EU border regulations, refugees are supposed to remain in the country in which they first arrive, so that the burden can be shared amongst member states. But Italy has been accused of turning a blind eye to the refugees passing through the country, so they don't become a burden on its social security system. World at 8. Italy and France are turning a blind eye because the bulk of these illegals want to settle in the UK or Germany. They are not made welcome in Italy or France. Cancel the Schengen border altogether and make every single EU country responsible for its own illegals on their own soil. That should do it. Germany, leading destination of asylum seekers for the past 2 years, moves to tighten asylum rules. Germany, which has for 2 years been Europe's leading destination for asylum seekers, is planning to toughen its immigration laws as it struggles to deal with the growing influx of new arrivals. While Greece and Italy have called for more European funding to help deal with the flow of immigrants arriving on their shores, Germany is readying steps to tighten rules for applicants from 3 Balkan states. The Bundestag, upper house of parliament, is due to debate draft legislation later this month that would make it easier for authorities to deport asylum seekers from the formerly war-ravaged states of Serbia, Macedonia and Bosnia-Herzegovina. Berlin says it wants to focus instead on refugees from more dangerous war zones such as Syria and Iraq. Lawmakers in the lower Bundestag have already approved the measure, which is opposed by human rights organisations. Ministers from Germany's 16 regional states held 2 days of discussions on the issue, ending on Friday. Serbs, often from the impoverished Roma minority, are amongst the biggest groups of asylum seekers in Germany. Even if their requests end up being rejected, they receive benefits while their applications are being considered, possibly for several months, that often exceed what they can hope to earn back home. For the last 2 years, Europe's biggest economy has attracted more asylum requests than any other country in the European Union. In 2013, requests jumped 64% to 127,023, according to the German government data, making up 29% of the total number of requests registered in the EU. World news. Has Egyptian President al-Sisi founded the solution to Palestine? An offer of land in the Sinai without Hamas. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas was quoted as saying Egypt offered him a huge tract in the massive Sinai Peninsula. Parties on both ends of an extraordinary deal that could potentially bring peace to the Middle East. The gift of a huge tract of land adjacent to Gaza for a Palestinian homeland now say the offer was never on the table. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas was quoted by the Palestinian Authority run MAN news service as saying Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi offered up to a 617 square mile chunk of the Sinai Peninsula for a Palestinian homeland. The massive parcel of land would be 5 times the size of Gaza, where nearly 2 million Palestinians are crowded into a 139 square mile strip of land. The Egyptians are prepared to receive all the refugees, saying, "Let's end the refugee story." The news agency quoted Abbas as telling members of the Palestinian Authority Fatah party that governs the West Bank. A senior leader in Egypt said, "A refuge must be found for the Palestinians and we have all this open land. This was said to me personally, but it's illogical for the problem to be solved at Egypt's expense. We won't have it." The news service quickly scrubbed Abbas's reference to the land deal, the rejection of which could undermine perceptions of Abbas' commitment to peace. But the newspaper Israel Today, citing sources privy to the details of the proposal, said Abbas rejected it despite substantial Egyptian pressure to accept it. After the supposed proposal was highlighted on Israel Army radio on Monday, officials rushed to deny it ever happened. Another stumbling block for Palestinians is a proviso reportedly contained in the offer: no Hamas governance. Egyptians reportedly insist the Sinai land be demilitarised and annexed to Gaza on the condition that Gaza will be governed by the Palestinian Authority and not the Hamas regime that recently fought a bloodied 52-day war with Israel. World at 8. El-Sisi is a good man and a sensible one. This chance should be taken by the Palestinians, but they won't. They will reject any solution because they don't want it. They want Hamas, they want war, and they want to be the butt of sympathy for the Islamic cause with all the aid and hype that entails. The Palestinians have always been a sore on the butt of Islam and seem to enjoy it despite all the deaths that might occur. Of course, if they took this chance, it might always move the Hamas problem into Egypt as opposed to relegating it to the Gaza Strip. Majority of surveyed Chinese expect war with Japan. China and Japan are heading towards military conflict, according to a majority of Chinese surveyed on ties between the Asian powers in the Sino-Japanese poll. The Genron China Daily Survey found that 53% of Chinese respondents and 29% of the Japanese polled expect their nations to go to war. The poll was released ahead of the second anniversary of Japan's move to nationalise some of the contested Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea. Relations between Japan and China have soured since Japan bought 3 of the tiny islands which China claims and calls the Diaoyu in 2012. Japan defended the move as an effort to thwart a plan by the anti-China governor of Tokyo to buy them, but China accused it of breaching an unwritten deal to keep the status quo. According to the poll, which has been conducted annually since the last trough in Sino-Japanese relations in 2005, Chinese and Japanese respondents both said the biggest hurdle to relations was territorial disputes, although the number voicing that view declined more than 10 points from 2012. Australia arrests 2 in Islamic centre raid. The centre is located in an area south of Brisbane which is due to host the G20 summit in November. Police in Australia have raided an Islamic centre in Queensland a day after the country's spy chief said he was considering upgrading the terror threat level. 2 men have been arrested on suspicion of terrorism offences, reports said. Authorities said the men were involved in recruiting, facilitating and funding people to travel to Syria to engage in hostile activities. Australia is working to stop people joining the Middle East jihadist groups. 2 men aged 21 and 31 were arrested at the Kra Islamic Centre south of Brisbane. Both will be charged with preparing for incursions into Syria, Australian reports said. The 21-year-old will be charged with recruiting fighters to join the conflict, while the 31-year-old will be charged with providing funds to militant group Jabhat al-Nusra. The raid took place a day after the head of the Australian Security and Intelligence Organisation, David Irvine, said he was assessing whether to raise the threat level. Australia has been at medium since the threat level system was introduced in 2003, according to the country's national security website. Thought for the day: a multiplicity of mantras. I thought I would today cover a multiplicity of mantras, or rather misinformation gathered as news from the powers that be, namely the bonded media as I call it. You see, the media, and especially the Daily Mail, give the general public some of the truth, in fact just enough of it to make them utter a word or two, and then the entire subject or subjects are forgotten and removed from that paper. In that way they cover themselves by printing an item which almost certainly is not in the interests on the subject of immigration, racial harmony or just plain survival of the species, and then wham, it no longer exists. And as we all know, if something is not put in front of the GBP all the time, they cease to even think about it. So I'm bringing back the dead in reality to put before you. One of the most interesting ones is the article on Ebola fear as 21,000 African students arrive in the UK from the infected areas of Africa. Now, in the civilised world of a dictatorship, this would not be allowed to happen. You see, a dictator, whilst dictating to ordinary subjects and keeping things on a leash, whilst also infringing on the ridiculous EU human rights rules, would also keep his subjects safe from a foreign onslaught of disease. Pandemics occur regularly in the Far East and the shutters come down immediately. They are never mentioned again. However, Ebola will not go quietly into the dark night, and as the Professor Anthony Glees, Professor of Politics at Buckingham University, called for West African students to be held in their home countries until they have been cleared of Ebola and the 21-day incubation period has passed. Now, a lot can happen in 21 days. Students' identity can be forged or bought for money. There is really little one can do with a black face on a visa or whatever item they need to come over here to study. The rules, apart from financial ones, are very slack, and we have probably millions of ex-students living over here and having their rights to a family life already. Once over here, there is very little that doesn't border on the would-be fascist or racist lines to remove them, illegal or not. Now 21,000 equates to the 21 days of incubation, and we all know that Ebola doesn't present immediately. We could have as many as 21,000 incubatees arriving over here unchecked and unmonitored. Not only would they go to outside housing facilities in those towns, but into the universities themselves, and not one person would be safe. It is not possible to check, but it is possible to forbid them coming over at all, and I frankly do not care about their human rights to spread disease in a foreign country. I only care about not getting it, because as sure as God made little green apples, you can bet those bastards will get free medical care and us silver voters will get zilch because we are older and whiter. And although having paid into the health system all our working lives, it would give preferential treatment to the new foreign young. Perhaps it is all in the plan, but this professor is obviously a liberal-minded and fair man, and even he sees the awful flaw in allowing possibly or probably infected people into this country. Africa should be shut down as far as immigration goes from the European side, because this is how most of them come through from Italy to France to us. On September the 6th, the Daily Mail published a picture of a large group of grinning black illegals virtually rioting to get into the UK. And what effect did this picture have on the establishment? Not a lot, you might say, and you would be right. Some mutterings from Cameron on lessening the figures on immigration, and a whole lot of hype on sodding Scotland. And that is what I mean, the main point of a soon-to-be terrible problem in human form, or nearly, coming our way, and the government does nothing until, as usual, it'll be too late. One cannot hold a committee investigation from the beyond, or whatever lies beyond, can one? Put this with the article on the complacent Home Office, which is probably run by immigrants, losing 175,000 illegals, and we have a complete picture of the method and mistakes made in even becoming a member of the EU, let alone still maintaining a Commonwealth office as well, which in fact is a defunct method of giving out more money to people who do not deserve it, so that the monarchy can have a bash at the palace from time to time and pat themselves on the back for having lost most of the colonies, thankfully. It is this reticence on behalf of the British to actually let go that has given us wall-to-wall Nepalese down south. These people are for the most part distant relations of serving or ex-serving Gurkhas and should not be over here at all. The fact that despite the relatively short period in which they've been allowed into the UK, down here they form a huge and growing pustule on the backside of parts of Hampshire, Surrey and Berkshire. One thing about London yesterday was that all the licensed London cabs had white drivers, whilst back home they're predominantly Nepalese. It doesn't take long for a parasitical society to latch on to ways of making more money in a strange country, and these people have done it. To walk to one of the parking lots in Camberley you have to walk through old Nepalese sitting on the ground waiting for the buses on which they can piss as well as travel. The sight and sound of these people make me personally sick. But do the papers print that? No, too near the racist bone, innit? But they do print the fact that it will be foreigners mainly who will carry out the decimation of the United Kingdom in the Scottish vote. Latest census figures show that the latest EU figures, not including the Brits, Welsh and Irish, are eligible to vote in the referendum, which should never have been allowed in the first place, to the tune of 120,824 bods, and that 80,000 of those have actually applied to vote. You can bet that quite a number of these are not of European descent but have come from or through Europe, and it is this huge amount of people who could sway the vote for yes or no in a country which is not their own and never will be. Now personally I couldn't give a flying F about whether Scotland stays or doesn't. We have paid for their awful parliament, they have free student grants, free prescriptions and free healthcare and better tax deals than us in the UK, so it really is just a ploy to get more. This they might do if Cameron bends over enough with enough Vaseline. Frankly, I would tell them to pee off and all the Scots from down here can go back there and stop claiming benefits and taking our jobs along with the immigrants and rebuild Hadrian's Wall and make sure they didn't come near the UK again. But then that is me and my fascist alter ego. And I might have Scottish blood, but I prefer to ignore that. The other point about a yes result is that then Scotland would join the EU and all the immigrants that we might stop if we came out of the EU would just pass through to Scotland and then down to the UK and better benefits. Just like the old days when Scotland and France were allies against the English. Talk about history repeating itself. The papers also named the Ripper, no not the Yorkshire one, the Jack one. If you were in Berlin in the 1930s, this article would have been a runner for the anti-Jewish propaganda guys. Wonderful. As usual they've steered it away from the royal family and the establishment to a poor Polish Jew. Now I'm not saying he wasn't Jack the Ripper as I wasn't there, but the one point I have taken exception to is the wording on the news of vulnerable victims. Now in case you don't know, that word vulnerable is used ad nauseum on the Muslim rape trials, and in those days prostitutes were not viewed as vulnerable young or older girls. They were viewed as ladies of disrepute, and frankly if a shawl worn by one of them contained DNA, I would think the number of clients she had had would have contributed as customers, not necessarily as the murderer. Blood and DNA can last for years and be for many reasons, and if she specialised in rough sex then any one of her customers could have killed her. This whole exercise has been carried out to provide some closure for the descendants of these victims. Crapola. It is an anti-Jewish message, pure and simple. It is also a lesson not to allow any immigration from any country in the future, and certainly not to capitalise on the few from the past. No one will really know, but this Jewish guy was certainly a very sick person who ended up mad and talking to himself in Yiddish and died aged 53 in 1919. Apparently he and his family were the victims of the Russian pogroms, which were endemic throughout Europe, and they fled to London. Now he might well be the Ripper, but it was still hushed up then because of the large Jewish community burgeoning in London in those days, many of which were powerful people and did not live in the East End. But it shows the power of the establishment and how now they think they can release details of these murders. When will it be that the establishment release the true details of the Muslim communities and their encroachment into and on this country and its people? Is it still considered racial harassment to print or speak the truth? When will the police and CPS treat white Indigenous reports of black on white crime on an equal footing with white on black or Muslim on non-Muslim? Are we being subjected to a form of media blackout on subjects which could offend the Muslim, Asian or black communities? Do excuse the pun. The reporting on the Lee Rigby killing and the beheading of an elderly lady recently vanished quite soon from the initial horror. The Lee Rigby killers were only brought to justice, and many would say not really, due to the fact they had no shame and were filmed committing this murder and were even talking to their audience whilst waving their hands around covered in Lee's blood. There should have been no trial, and the police would have been in their rights to kill both these killers on the spot as they were a danger to the public. But did they? No. And did the media skirt around the fact they were converts to Islam and openly proclaimed that killing as homage to Allah? Yes, they did. And all because the court case pending and the fact that one of the killers was hospitalised. The whole affair was a denigration both of our justice system and, to be honest, our immigration system, which allowed an enriched community to watch and film this murder untouched and unnamed. An utter blot on Britain and its inhabitants, and where Islam scored the greatest high since 9/11 on its got away with murder chart. So don't believe the duplicity of the press mantras. Look beyond and think beyond and you will find the truth. And it isn't pleasant. Our establishments simply do not care about the ordinary people at all, because the ordinary people do not care for themselves or their kith and kin. It isn't until you love yourself you can love your country, and it isn't until you can defend yourself that you can defend your country either. And finally, a 2 for 1 day Wednesday. US women's rights. In 1918 women had no rights. In 1914 women fought for their rights. And in 2014 women are always right. And those of you in our age group will really appreciate this. The rest of you will quite soon. Recently when I went to a McDonald's, I saw on the menu that you could have an order of 6, 9 or 12 chicken nuggets. I asked for half a dozen. "We don't have half a dozen nuggets," said the teenager at the counter. "You don't?" I replied. "We only have 6, 9 or 12 was the reply. "So I can't order half a dozen nuggets, but I can order 6. "That's right." So I shook my head and ordered 6. Unbelievable, but sadly true. It must have been the same one I asked for sweetener and she said they don't have any, only Splendor and Sugarine. 2. I was checking out the local Aldi with just a few items and the lady behind me put her things on the belt close to mine. I picked up one of those dividers that they keep by the cash register and placed it between our things so they wouldn't get mixed. After the girl had scanned all of my items, she picked up the divider, looking all over for the barcode so she could scan it. Not finding the barcode, she said to me, "Do you know how much this is?" I said to her, "I've changed my mind, I don't think I'll buy that today." She said OK, and I paid her for the things I'd left. She had no clue to what had just happened, but the lady behind me had a big smirk on her face as I left. 3. A woman at work was seen putting a credit card into her floppy drive and pulling it out very quickly. When I inquired as to what she was doing, she said she was shopping on the internet and they kept asking her for a credit card number, so she was using the ATM thingy. Keep shuddering. 4. I recently saw a distraught young lady weeping beside her car. "Do you need some help?" I asked. She replied, "I knew I should have replaced the battery to this remote door opener. Now I can't get into my car. Do you think they," pointing to a distant convenience store, "would have a battery to fit this?" I said, "I don't know. Do you have an alarm too?" I asked. "No, just this remote thingy," she answered, handing it and the car keys to me. As I took the key and manually unlocked the door, I replied, "Why don't you drive over there and check about the batteries? It's a long walk." Please, lass, lie down before you hurt yourself. 5. Several years ago we had a work experience lass who was none too swift. One day she was typing and turned to her secretary and said, "I'm almost out of typing paper, what do I do?" "Just use the paper from the photocopier," the secretary told her. With that, the lass took her last remaining blank piece of paper, put it in the photocopier and proceeded to make 5 blank copies. Oh dear, brunette by the way. 6. A mother calls 911 very worried, asking the dispatcher if she needs to take her child to an emergency as it had eaten ants. The dispatcher tells her to give the child some Benadryl and he should be fine. The mother says, "I just gave him some ant killer." Dispatcher, rush him to emergency right now. Life is tough. It's even tougher if you're stupid. Someone had to remind me, so I'm reminding you too. Don't laugh. It's all true. Perhaps us being outbred is a good thing. You've been listening to The World at 8. I'm Lynn Mozart and I wish you all a very good night. Within the UK. Immigration officers were said to have become suspicious because of the inordinate number of weddings that were taking place at the parish church, which rose from 6 a year to 6 a day. Edward Lucas, prosecuting, told the court. He said that many involved European Economic Area nationals, mainly Bulgarian, marrying non-EEA nationals so the latter could try to remain in the UK. Jurors were told how several brides at some ceremonies shared the same wedding dress and queued at the back waiting to get married. World at 8. This man should be deported immediately and so should his victims. There must be records of these marriages and they should all be traced and deported. We should send out a message that this is not allowed in Britain today. The stronger that message, the better for us. BBC reports 250 children at risk of grooming in...
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday, 10th of September 2014. Reverend Nathan Ntege, 55, is accused of marrying almost 500 bogus couples. BBC reports 250 children at risk of grooming in Greater Manchester. At Britain's door, migrants defy French border crackdown. Austria's Vice-Chancellor Reinhold Mitterlehner calls to bring back Austrian border controls. Germany, leading destination of asylum seekers for the past 2 years, moves to tighten asylum rules. Has Egyptian President al-Sisi found the solution to Palestine? An offer of land in the Sinai without Hamas. Majority of surveyed Chinese expect war with Japan. Australia arrests 2 in Islamic centre raid. Thought for the day, a multiplicity of mantras. And finally, 2 for 1 day Wednesday. UK News. Reverend Nathan Ntege, 55, accused of marrying almost 500 bogus couples. A vicar has been accused of facilitating a matrimonial conveyor belt after performing hundreds of sham weddings so foreign nationals could stay in the UK, a court has heard. Reverend Nathan Ntege, 55, is accused of marrying almost 500 bogus couples at St Judes with St Aidan Church in South East London. The court was told Ntege's aim was to provide an industrial-scale abuse of the system of immigration control, identifying, assessing and intervening with young people at an earlier age. BBC Radio Manchester obtained figures from safeguarding boards across Greater Manchester, the groups of professionals who are given the job of protecting children from abuse. World at 8. The one prime concern for these investigators is the fact that if these children live near a Muslim community or go to school with Muslims, therein lies the main risk. At Britain's door, migrants defy French border crackdown. It took Eritrean migrant Adhanomi Gabre 2 years and several brushes with death to reach northern France from his East African home. Now 35 kilometres from his destination, he says no border controls can keep him from reaching Britain. England is my goal, Gabre, 28, said outside his makeshift Greater Manchester. Nearly 250 children are at risk of being sexually exploited across Greater Manchester, the BBC reports. Figures show that out of 246 children being dealt with by local councils, 111 were deemed to be at high risk of being sexually exploited. Rochdale Council had the highest number of children at risk, but said tackling sexual exploitation was one of its top priorities. The council's assessment looks at school attendance, home life, sexual health and types of risky behaviour. The rating is reviewed at least every 3 months or following a significant event to allow the teams to monitor progress by the rating score increasing or decreasing over time. Gail Hopper, Director of Children's Services at Rochdale Borough Council, told staff were now better trained, skilled and supported to effectively assess and manage risk. She said there was a better process of